Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro want your money. They want all the money in the world. According to them, the brand of Dungeons & Dragons is under-monetized. That's what they've been telling shareholders at least, and now they're pushing for that sweet, sweet cash from role players. They're making changes to Dungeons & Dragons. They're creating a new version called 1D&D and building it alongside their new digital platform designed to exploit players and dungeon masters excessively. But I think they've made a huge mistake. They've overlooked a massive linchpin of their monetization strategy, and it could spell disaster for Dungeons & Dragons and all Wizards' future plans. So here's the situation now. We have Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and it is the most popular the Dungeons & Dragons has ever been. Players and hobbyists are used to buying the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and the Monster Manual. And let's be real here, more often than not, it's the Dungeon Master who buys all of these things for the group. Maybe each player will buy a Player's Handbook if they're exceptionally committed, or even the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide if they were duped. And D&D, compared to a lot of other role-playing games, is already pretty heavily monetized. There's a lot of content to buy, and there's a very few other games that require 3 books as the arguable bare minimum buy-in to play. But this isn't enough for Hasbro Wizards. They're not content with just selling books. Now, they're building a new version of D&D that will come with a ton of digital microtransactions, services, and subscriptions built into its very DNA. Dungeons & Dragons is changing, perhaps forever. But this plan of theirs has a huge flaw in it. See, to put it simply, Hasbro Wizards are counting on normalizing digital services amongst the player base of D&D. Hasbro Wizards have said they want D&D to be monetized like digital video games. Hasbro CEO Chris Cox is an ex-Microsoft executive. His background is the marketplace that birthed digital monetization, live services, loot boxes, subscription fees, cosmetic items. To him, all of this isn't particularly innovative. To do it in D&D is just an extension of what he already knows. But here's the rub. D&D isn't a video game, even when it's played in a virtual tabletop. Okay, so this might seem obvious, but it's a very important distinction to make now that we're entering this brave new world of digital microtransactions and live services. Unlike video games, role-playing games are democratized in a big way. DMs, players, they can choose not to allow certain things at their table. If Hasbro Wizards plan on selling, for example, magic items and cosmetic skins for characters in their companion app, they still require the entire playgroup to accept the power of those items and those cosmetic skins. These items need to be consensual. This ain't no college frat house party. It's harder for a corporation to take a top-down approach with sales in this marketplace. Not to mention, a lot of these digital offerings, like skins for digital avatars, or selling subclasses, or selling subscriptions for monsters and magic items and dungeons and pre-made adventures, and I can keep going, it might run into the problem that there's a huge culture of homebrewing content amongst dungeon masters who prefer to create the content of their games themselves. It's a lot easier to write up your own monster stat block for your game than it is to hack World of Warcraft to allow your characters to run like Naruto. And besides the ease of access, role players aren't just mindless consumers. This is an active, engaged hobby filled with creative people. Most of the time, we don't just regurgitate pre-made adventures and run everything from the official book. Speak to most DMs, and even if they have run pre-written adventures, they have added twists, they've created NPCs, they've tied that adventure into the backstories of their players, and likely even into their own homebrewed settings, rather than, Ravenloft or Equestria. No two games are the same, even if both are run from the same playbook. And though Hasbro Wizards want to build a walled, closed-off garden where they can keep players locked into their digital storefront, we're not there yet. people haven't yet bought in. We've never seen something like this get tried at this scale before. It's new. So if Hasbro Wizards want to control D&D to the extent that they seem to want to, if they want the power to truly dictate the terms of the game, they will have to obfuscate the core fact that role-playing is a hobby that has always belonged to the players. It's a creative activity, far more so than digital video games. One of the most exciting elements of DMing a game is world building. Seriously, if you speak to a player, they'll tell you all about their character, and you'll quickly regret asking them anything. Speak to a DM, and you'll quickly hear about their homebrewed world, and you'll probably quickly regret asking them anything. But it's one of the most attractive parts of DMing, even if the game is set in an established pre-written setting. DMs will create NPCs, they create dungeons, they create encounters, and this is a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun. It's why the most passionate, engaged people in the hobby tend to DM games. Selling that type of content will be hard. Ultimately, DMs have a lot of power at the table, and if most DMs reject the 1D&D virtual tabletop and in-game store as a tool for their games, then this entire enterprise from Hasbro Wizards could completely bomb, just like 4th edition. We could see a collective exodus over to a different game, like Pathfinder. And this could spell disaster for Wizards, because they are pumping a dragon's hoard of money into this idea, so they need it to work. There's no option for failure here. They're erecting a house of cards, and one big gust of wind could kill the D&D brand, cutting short the boom that role-playing has enjoyed recently. And I just haven't seen any evidence to show that Hasbro Wizards are even aware that they're stepping into a minefield here. All their correspondence to shareholders, all their PR, seems like they're simply counting on being able to convince DMs to use these tools in their games, to accept cosmetic items, to pay for monster stat blocks. And I'm not convinced that they can be convinced. But a word of caution to this tale. Should Hercules fight, you will feel. Wait, no, wrong script. Should Wizards fight, it might not feel. That's better. Because this is where the sinister elements unfurl. Most dungeon masters who homebrew, who create their own monsters, who build their own adventures, they tend to be people who have either role-played as a player for a while, or DM'd their own pre-made adventures, or want to DM a smaller pre-made game before they go hog wild and start building their own thing. In other words, most DMs who homebrew a lot of content or feel confident enough to do their own adventure design, their own monster design, or their own dungeon design, they tend to have been immersed in role-playing game culture for at least a little while to learn the ropes. They have percolated like a pickle. And I suspect that what Wizards want to do is to warp that underlying role-playing game culture. They want to change this hobby from a creative, engaging one that I've just described into a culture more akin to video games. A consumer-based hobby where role players are more concerned with consuming the next product rather than actually, role-playing. And if we're honest, 5th edition was already a successful step in that direction. It didn't go too far in my opinion, but so much of D&D discourse is now focused on the next subclass, the next pre-written adventure, the next setting supplement, the next product to consume. And Hasbro Wizards have a ton of power in this relationship to push 1D&D on the community, and subsequently, to success. Existing DMs might not be able to fight against that, because as much power as DMs have at their table, Wizards have said it's players that they really want to monetize more. And while they mentioned that in the context of t-shirts and Funko Pops and merch, they also meant it in relation to 1D&D. They want to sell player skins, they want to sell subclasses, they want to sell magic items. Really, they want to sell anything of perceived value at all for players, so watch out, Bad Dragon. And let me tell you, All it takes is one player at a table to buy into this system, and it will create a fear of missing out amongst the rest of the group, and then all is lost. You may have heard of this before. It's called FOMO, and it is an incredibly powerful force for businesses everywhere. It is a part of human psychology, and it's the feeling of anxiety that we get when we feel like we're missing out on something. This is the life force of cash stores in video games, in apps, in expensive war games like Warhammer, in the marketing of video nasties in the 70s. It's the very reason why when new editions of games come out, the community more often than not buys into it and ignore older editions. It takes an actual movement of people, like the OSR movement, to convince people to try something else. Humans are social animals. Once one player buys in, other players at the table will start to seriously consider it too, and it will slowly become normalized. Plus, not to mention, a lot of the innovations that Hasbro Wizards plan for 1D&D, like a companion app, might be genuinely useful. I think the DMs are going to find utility in some of these tool sets. Tracking player sheets and having quick access to pre-made monster stat blocks and magic items, for example, and organizational tools. There's an entire ancillary market built around selling organizational tools and campaign managers to DMs. There is a desire for this stuff out there. I remember when a lot of it was free, but the fact that there's businesses that can survive selling it right now shows that there are people, there are players, there are DMs who will pay money for this stuff. And I suspect that lots of those same people will prefer to use official tools if they have that option. D&D Beyond is incredibly popular for a reason. Not to mention the elephant in the room. Yes, it's just after Christmas and I've put on a little bit of weight. I'm a little self-conscious about it. Why'd you bring it up? But Hasbro Wizards are going to market the absolute hell out of these services. And, spoiler alert, marketing works. There is a reason that the largest expenditure for most companies is advertising. And I'm not talking about Mad Men billboards here. I'm talking about introductory offers, the first month is free kind of deals. Get the Dungeon Master's Guide and Player's Handbook for free by signing up to 1D&D VTT this weekend. Things like that are hard to pass up on for most players. And then, slowly but surely, the monetization emerges. Like a man walking towards you with purpose in a raincoat in a deserted car park. Then, the gradual push towards selling things that didn't used to cost money. I read an account of a D&D player recently whose table used D&D Beyond as a campaign tracker, and all the characters in that game were registered on the D&D Beyond service. But that player had bought all of the physical D&D books, but when it came time to choose their level 3 subclass, they couldn't pick the one they wanted, because even though they had bought the paper copies, they hadn't bought the digital add-ons in D&D Beyond. And sure, you could ignore that. You can have one player in the group use pen and paper, or a free PDF that they stumbled upon online. But then, that FOMO kicks in. It gets a little bit awkward. Everyone who's using the tracking app gets a little bit annoyed at the person who isn't. It becomes awkward, it defeats the purpose of the tool. Eventually, social pressures dictate, hey, you might as well buy the digital book on the platform. It's a barbarian subclass. How much could it cost? $5? And this is what we're going to see more and more of. As digital services get offered, there's more to miss out on. There's more to think about. There's more monetization to resist. And that sounds miserable to me. It took around 12 years for video games to go from people expecting new skins and customization to just be included in a game for free, perhaps with a cheat code, to today where everything is for sale and nobody bats an eye. I gotta pay cash money for Big Head mode? Video games are dead to me. This isn't a blitzkrieg, it's a siege. Hasbro Wizards will seek to wear role players down. Then, how you gonna roleplay a big head character? I don't wanna pay money for big head mode in Dungeons and Dragons. Let me roleplay a big head person. Seriously, I would kickstart that book. We might see a similar trajectory occur with role-playing games, even if at first analog tabletop games seem so much more intrinsically incompatible with that style of monetization. But If people are generally fans of the new 1 D&D rule set, then the job of monetizing D&D this way will be made so much easier for Hasbro Wizards. So this could either blow up in their faces and potentially collapse the game, or it could work and the game could be changed irrevocably for the worst. As someone who lived through the video game boom, I feel like I'm having a major case of deja vu here. So subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content covering D&D and role-playing games realistically, and check out my most recent video here. I'm not interested in fighting ghosts. For one, I don't have a magic weapon, but I do want to fight corporate greed and advocate for role players. So a huge thanks to my patrons who support my ability to create this content, especially Sonic Bread and Games Workshop. And I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye!